Hey guys, welcome back. So today, I brought home this NorthStar generator. It is powered by a 13-horse Honda GX390, and I found this one on Facebook Marketplace for only $100. According to the seller, it needs a new tank, needs a new battery, and when I went to pick it up, he also added it's been quite a few years since this has run, so likely the carb needs to be cleaned as well. Now, if you've seen my recent videos, this might seem a little bit like deja vu because I recently brought home another NorthStar powered by a 16-horse V-twin Vanguard. And what we discovered on that one was that one of the connecting rods was blown. So although the engine still ran, it was down on power, obviously, and that engine ended up being a total loss. So my hope today, by the end of this video, is that we'll have this one up and running. And I'm kind of anxious to see what the power quality is like because this power head, it is very well built, and I believe it's going to be around 5% or less THD. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. Well, I'm hoping to have a bit better luck with this NorthStar. This has a very similar story to the last one. The last one, the guy said it just needs a battery, a carb clean, and it has an oil leak that needs to be sorted out. This one was the same price, mostly the same problems, except instead of an oil leak, the owner said that it needs a new fuel tank. He looked into it a few years ago. He said they are available for about $250. And then he handed me the piece that made the fuel tank bad. This is the fuel valve and the bushing that holds it in. And he said there's no way to fix that, which is not true. This is a common thing that needs maintenance, and a new bushing's only a few bucks. So I did offer to fix it for him and return it, but he declined. He actually said he has no use for it. He doesn't lose power often, and he just wants the garage space back. So yeah, hopefully the tank is an easy fix. If it's not, I do have the tank from the other NorthStar. So one way or another, this will have a tank that works. So before digging into the tank, I say we just start with the basics and go from there. All right, first things first, let's check the oil. Make sure we have some. Yeah, plenty of oil. It's actually dripping out, so it's full to where it needs to be. The oil color doesn't look that bad, so it should be fine to test with. I'm also noticing the fuel valve on the carb was left in the on position, which doesn't seem like a big deal, especially since the fuel line fell out. But it tells me likely it wasn't stored dry. And the line that actually fell out was the drain. This tank has two valves. One is to drain the tank when you're done using it, which is a great idea. And the other one is for the carburetor, and that valve seems to be intact. So, we'll double check that one just to make sure that bushing is good. But I'd say likely the carb, it needs to be gone through like the owner said. Another good check is just to make sure the throttle plate moves. The resting position is wide open throttle. So if that sticks and you go to start it, then the engine's going to race out of control. So just move it and make sure it moves. And in this case, it does move, but it's actually feels really gummed up. So I think instead of trying to start it with the existing carb in this condition, I think we should pull it off, go through it real quick before trying to start it. Yeah, I think this is supposed to have a screw or a bolt holding the filter down. And this filter is done. Just turned to dust. So We'll need a new one of those. And I think you can see, this is the choke side. It's all sticky around the gasket, and you can actually see varnish on the choke plate. So I'm thinking we're going to see a lot more of that on the other side. So we'll slide this forward a bit. I do want to get that fuel line off. But first we can remove the governor linkage. So the carb's pretty dirty, at least on the outside, and this gasket is just stuck on there with the varnish. So we'll get it opened up. Now I can smell the fuel that's in here. It smells pretty bad. So let's pull the drain first. See if there's anything left in there. Not a good sign. The bolt is loose, but kind of hard to turn out. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely corrosion in there. You can see it on the bolt, or at least varnish. Fuel color doesn't look awful, but it definitely smells that way. Yeah, same thing on that bolt. Definitely some rust or some varnish. So I'm thinking the rest of the carb is going to look that way. And yeah. A lot of junk, but I think that is varnish. So as bad as that looks, I think it will clean up. Yeah, main jet completely clogged right down the center there. The pin also stuck. And so's the float. So yeah, not looking good. A lot of times when the needle is stuck like that, it's hard to get it out without damaging the needle. But PB Blaster sometimes will free it up, or some other penetrating oil. So let's try to get the sediment bowl off. That came off easy. That actually looks pretty good. So let me spend a minute. I'm just going to spray this down, see if we can get some movement out of it. No, it's not moving. There's actually a spring right there, and I think that's why I'm able to move the float down, but it's supposed to spring back up. So I don't want to break anything here. I think this carb will clean up. So before I go much further with this, I'm probably going to put it through the ultrasonic. But let's at least try to get the pilot jet out. I think that has a chance. So we'll just start by removing the idle set screw, which holds the pilot in place. Yeah, and I would say that's clogged as well. So this is what I'm talking about for the throttle. So I don't know if it's supposed to be like this. It feels like there's a damper right now, like it's not flipping open and closed like it should. At least like most do. But it is moving. And actually I don't see any varnish on it, so that might be okay. So yeah, let's let this soak in the ultrasonic. I don't like putting the neoprene tip in there for the needle. Sometimes the degreaser can damage it. But in this case, I think it's going to do, well, probably more harm trying to take it out in the condition that it's in. Okay, 5 minutes later, and it's interesting. It's still kind of there, although it looks like the needle is moving now. So we're making progress. Needle actually moves as well, so let's get that out. Maybe. No, not quite yet. So we'll give it another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll try taking this apart. So it is cleaning up, but it's taking its time. Usually 5 or 10 minutes is all that's needed. And you can see there's still some junk on there. So we're going to need, I'd say, at least another 10 or 15 minutes. But at least the needle is unstuck. So chances are that can be reused. We also have the main jet and the emulsion tube, and it doesn't look too good. It's still plugged, and I'm willing to bet it may not come out. At least without a little bit more soaking, but let's see. No. Oh, it's turning. So that was pretty stuck. All right, well, it dropped down, but I don't think it's going to come out. There's just still too much debris in there. Sometimes the right size Allen wrench you can use to kind of get down where the emulsion tube is and just give it that extra push. So let me take a look. We might be able to get that out yet. Yep, there's the main jet. And the emulsion tube. So yeah, that does not look good. A lot of holes are plugged up. And of course the main jet also plugged solid. So let's just clean this stuff. We'll make sure the passages are clear, and then we'll soak this again. Yeah, this is pretty bad. The motion tubes usually don't get too plugged up. You know, sometimes I've seen an insect nest do it. In this case, it is plugged, or it was plugged from top to bottom. So even if the main jet was clear, you know, no fuel would have made it to the engine. Yeah, every single one of these is plugged. So I cleaned up really well, but took a lot longer than normal. It was a good half hour in there to get all that debris off. It was really clinging on there. So I did have to use, at one point, a dental tool just to kind of break it up, and the Simple Green did the rest. So I think we're ready to get it back together. You know, this should run the engine. I guess the question is, you know, how well? It was pretty gummed up, even the main jet, just touching it now. It's still a little bit sticky, so, you know, if there's a passage internally that's clogged, this carb may not run the engine perfect. Yeah, the needle also looks pretty good, so I think it's going to seal. So the old degreaser I used to use, the Harbor Freight, that used to damage the neoprene rubber. The Simple Green, I haven't really used it enough to say for sure, you know, if it's safe, but it's looking like it might be. Okay, and then we'll do the sediment bowl. Last, we have the pilot jet. So a lot of times you have to put a little bit of WD-40 or a lubricant of some sort just to help the jet fully seat. You want to make sure it goes all the way down, or else, you know, this is going to be an air leak and it's going to cause the engine to run pretty poorly. So there, that is all the way in. We put this here, which is just a spacer. And the purpose of that is so that when you put the idle set screw in, it can apply a bit of pressure to the pilot jet to hold it in place. It's just a press fit. You know, otherwise this generator doesn't idle, so you wouldn't need the screw if it wasn't for the pilot jet. So just a couple threads poking out. And that should do it. So let's bolt it on and try it out. So I'm going to leave the gasket alone. It's actually in very good shape. Came off nice and clean. But if we do have issues with surging, you know, that is something to look at. Also, this spacer, it's actually an insulator to keep the heat away from the carb. That can crack. And there's also a gasket behind there. So a leak anywhere between the carb and the engine would cause a lean condition. And of course, the carb could too. That's usually the cause of a lean condition, but it's not impossible to have an issue with the insulator. Both Honda and Honda Clone carbs, they use 3/16 line, which is what this is. But I'm noticing the tank uses 1/4 inch. And in this case, the way they adapted it was they just jammed a 3/16 line onto a 1/4 inch fuel filter. So everything from here on is 1/4 inch, and from here to the carb is 3/16. So, you know, that does work for sure in a pinch. You just got to worry about damaging that smaller line. They do actually make lines for that purpose. This one actually, I believe, is a Ryobi part, but others sell it as well. It actually takes 1/4 inch on one end and reduces it to 3/16. So that's what I'm going to install here. And then from this point forward, we can use 1/4 inch fittings. Throttle plate 2 moves a lot easier. So before it was acting like there was a damper on it, and now it moves like it should. It's interesting that this generator has a throttle adjustment on it. It's actually locked in place, and this screw sets the max speed. It's actually not touching that screw. So, you know, likely we have to loosen this a bit to make adjustments and then tighten it to where we need it. And this set screw really is just setting the max speed. So, yeah, we'll double check that once the engine's running. So for now, I'm just going to feed it a little bit of fuel. I'm going to leave the air filter off because it's turning to dust, so I don't want to have any of that sucked into the engine. So it looks like the needle's working. Fuel level is right there, and it seems to be holding pretty steady. So, you know what's next. All right, let's give this a try. I've got a light plugged in and turned on. I've also got the kilowatt so we can see what the voltage and the hertz are at. So we'll turn the ignition on. Fuel's already on. We'll turn the choke on. Okay, good. The carb is running the engine well. It's not surging. I could turn the choke off right away, and the engine sounds good. Plus, we're making power. Now, we were slow. You know, according to the kilowatt, it was 52 hertz. It should be closer to 62, and because of that, the voltage was also low at about 72 volts. So we do need more spring tension. We have to move this arm to the left, but it is not budging. So I'm going to loosen up this nut we'll try to make an adjustment and we'll start it again. So I just took some of that rust off the threads before trying to loosen this up. And we'll also add a bit of WD. And there we go. We have movement. So it goes against the set screw right there. So I'm actually going to leave it kind of loose. We'll restart the engine. We'll hold it against the set screw, check the speed, and just make adjustments to that set screw until we reach about 61.5 Hertz. Once we get to that point, I'm going to lock this down again because there should not be a reason that someone has to adjust this normally when running. All right, so we're all refueled. Turn the ignition on. We'll do choke on, at least for one pull. So that set screw is pretty much in the right spot. You know, I just loosened up the nut, moved the throttle up against it, and that brought us up to 61 Hertz. So that was pretty close. I did back off the set screw maybe half a turn, set the throttle against it, and just tightened everything down. So now we're at about 61.5 Hertz to maybe 62 Hertz, which is good. And the voltage came up as well. We're close to 120 volts at that speed. Now, although that sounds good, we might have an issue because this generator doesn't have an AVR, and likely that voltage will drop by as much as 20 volts at full load. So the no load voltage, I think, should be higher. So we won't know that for sure until we load test it. But if the voltage drops, then we might have to dig in and test those capacitors. Potentially they need to be replaced. You know, for now though, I think it's earned its oil change. Yeah, the oil that came out looks pretty good. There is no metallic in it, no shiny bits. So I would say the engine is likely in good health. And I can't say the same though for the battery, because when I crank this, we get absolutely nothing from the battery. So either we have a bad starter or switch, or I'd say more likely the battery itself is bad. So we can test that real quick. I'm just going to use a test light, so one lead is on the negative, and if we just touch this to positive, this should light up. And we get absolutely nothing. So this battery is stone cold dead, and I would say it's not going to take a charge. So let's get this battery out. You know, I have one that works we can put in its place, but before we do that, I'm just going to spend a second and clean up some of this mess. So usually when disconnecting a battery from anything that has a negative ground, you want to start with the negative, because the negative wire actually runs over to the engine. So everything here is essentially battery negative, including the frame. And if you start with the positive and that wrench touches anything, you're going to create a short circuit. With the negative, it doesn't matter. You can touch just about anything and you're not going to create a short. Of course, in this case, it doesn't matter too much since the battery can't even light up the test light. And when connecting a good battery up, you just do the opposite. Connect the positive first, because right now, there's no circuit. So even if I touch to anything on the frame, since it's not connected to negative, you're not going to get a short circuit. Just looking to see if there's a date code on the battery, but don't see one. Anyway, I would say this has been outside for a while, because this battery is sitting, well, in a pool of water. So I'm going to drill a couple holes near the bottom to prevent this from happening again. That's what a good battery looks like. So let's crank it, see if the starter works. All right, let's try it. No choke. Nice. And I take back what I said earlier on my concerns about the voltage. If this was a brushed generator without an AVR, the voltage would drop by 20 volts under a full load. But this, it isn't brushed. It is actually brushless. And inside this panel, there are likely one, possibly several capacitors that regulate the voltage. And a brushless generator should maintain its voltage under load, even without an AVR. So I'm going to leave good enough alone. I guess we'll find out for sure when we bring it outside for the load test, but I think we're going to be okay. So with that in mind, we only have one major issue left, and that is the tank. So there are 5 bolts underneath holding it in place. So let's get those bolts out, we get the tank off, and get that leak taken care of. Well, the fact that the bushing fell out isn't a huge concern, but whatever the guy tried to use to glue this back in might have done more harm than good. Yeah, I've been picking at it a little bit, and thankfully it seems to come off, so it's not stuck on there very well. Even if it was, really the important part here is kind of this inner wall of this hole right here. That needs to be smooth. That is the sealing surface. The rest, not so important. So yeah, let me just spend a second, try to get most of this stuff off, and then we will install a new bushing. Yeah, cleaned up pretty well, at least the part that needs to. The side here, the glue's kind of sticky and it's not really scraping off that well. So I'm just going to leave good enough alone. There was a burr kind of on the far side there, and it looks a little bit messed up, but I think it'll seal. So I am not going to reuse this valve. It's not in good shape because it's covered with glue. So I will put a new valve in there, and then, while we're here, I'm going to pull this one out and put a new bushing in here as well. So the valve I'm going to use, I think it's pretty much the same as the one that we are replacing. So it comes with the bushing, this kit, as well as the valve and a filter, which is good because when you're draining the fuel into your tank, if there's any junk in here, you want to filter it so that you only get the good stuff back in your tank. So to install this, pretty straightforward. Just insert the bushing first, and then you'll need some oil or soap on the inner diameter here as well as right there. And that should do it. And the old line, it's actually in really good condition, so I'm just going to cut it back past all the glue and adhesive, and we will reattach it with a clamp. And there is no easy way to get these out. These bushings, when they get petrified, usually hold the valve in pretty tight. So just go easy. You know, the tank is plastic, so you don't want to break it. So I probably should have done this before installing the valve, but you know, just because it's new doesn't mean it works. So right now the valve is off. We should be able to build some pressure, and we do. It's holding steady, so the valve is working. And if we open the valve, the pressure bleeds off. And if we close it again, we're holding pressure. So the new valve, it works just fine. I can't say the same though for the old. You know, I was just cleaning this up, getting ready to reinstall it, and I noticed a couple things. I guess first off, there's no fuel filter. And secondly, you know, I went to pressure test it. Right now it is fully off, and in that position it should hold pressure like the valve we just tested. And instead, can't build any pressure. So this valve, unfortunately, it's bad. So I do have another like this. So we'll just install the same right there. So I'm going to leave the tank loose, and I'm not going to plumb it into the carb yet. But I do want to put some fuel in it, let it sit overnight, and just make sure we don't have any leaks. Well, it's been 24 hours and we are nice and dry. Both valves are looking good. So I've already secured the drain with a couple of zip ties. I just wanted to take the weight off the valve and the bushing to prevent a failure. And I also noticed the line, it was too long by a good few inches. So it was actually dragging on the ground. And I'm thinking that might have been the point of failure because the handles, they're right here. So if you're pushing this thing around and you have a line dragging on the ground, it wouldn't take much to step on it and then that line rip right out of the tank. So, you know, with that cut short and the zip ties to support the weight, I don't think we're going to have an issue there again. So that just leaves us with this valve, which feeds the carburetor. So we already have a line here. It's actually in very good shape. So all I need to do is connect that back to the valve, and that'll get us to right here. But we're still short from this adapter right here. So, you know, we could splice in a piece, but I'm thinking a better idea might just be using this line right here. This is a heavy duty 3/16 line. I can connect it right to the carb. And on the other side, I can just use this brass adapter. It converts 3/16 to 1/4 inch. And last but not least, got to get the air filter on. So I ordered a new one. It's a Sten's part. And I also found a wing nut. So there was a wing nut missing. And the only wing nut that was included was the one that holds the cover down. But you need a second one to actually hold the filter against the seal down here. All right, let's give this thing a try. Now, this machine, it is rated at 6,600 watts. So the plan is to bring it up to the max to make sure the engine can handle it. You know, of course, we're going to start without a load. We're going to let things warm up. While it's doing that, we will double check the output using the kilowatt. We can see what the voltage and the hertz are at. We also have the oscilloscope to see the sine wave. And the amp probe will tell us the total harmonic distortion. Now, this machine, I believe, is going to be a low THD machine. You know, most aren't, but this generator specifically advertises that. And it's made out of copper and is actually designed in such a way that it should not produce, I would think, over 6%. So that is what we're going to find out. So let's get the engine started and put it to the test. It's acting like the pilot jet is clogged, unfortunately. But we can double check. Let's put a load on, see if it gets any better. Yeah, and it does sound better. So it can handle 3,000 watts. It is still bouncing around a little bit. But yeah, I think we're gonna have to shut it down and go through that carb again. Going to start actually by draining the bowl. I want to see if any junk got in there. It looks pretty clean. No water, really no debris. So I don't think there's an issue with the kind of the quality of the fuel getting to the carb. So we're gonna have to get the airbox off, and I'm thinking let's just pull the pilot jet, see if that's clogged, and if it's not, we might just enlarge it a bit. It's not clogged, unfortunately, so I'm going to use the micro drill bit set. We'll just find out what size this is at, and then go one bigger. Alright, so a 78 fits. 77 does not. So let's make it a 77. We'll try it again. Yeah, it went through pretty quickly. So this may not make a big difference. We might have to go one size larger, but let's try this for now. And if this doesn't do it, we'll try the next size. I was about to say that did it, but I can still hear the surge. It's definitely not as bad, but it is still there just a bit. So I'm tempted to go up the next size, but I'm thinking for now, let's bring on a load of 3,000 watts and see if it can work itself out. Anyway, without a load, the sine wave doesn't look great, and the THD is pretty low. It's at about 5%. Although you can see it fluctuating with that small surge in the engine. So let's bring on about a half load. We'll do 2,000 watts. It's running pretty well. Now we're at 3,000 watts. Engine is fairly stable. Sine wave cleaned up a bit. And the THD is very solid now at 5%. So yeah, not too bad. So we'll give this a few minutes, and then we'll try bumping the load up to 6,500 watts. Alright, it's been a few minutes at 3,000 watts, no issues to report. So let's swap 1,000 for a 2. So now we're at 4,000 watts. We'll do 5,000. It's getting pretty loud. 5,500. 6,000. It's doing it. I wouldn't say convincingly. So this is rated at 6,500, so let's bring on a quick 2. We're at 6,000. 6,500. It's holding. The THD is at 5.6%. The sine wave doesn't look too bad. So we'll give this a few minutes. Make sure there's no surprises. Yeah, no issues handling max load of 6,500 watts, so let's take the load off and see how we're doing on the surging front. Tiny bit. It actually kind of worked itself out. If you look at the THD now, it's nice and stable. And if you look at the Hertz gauge, just the tiniest little fluctuation. So I think we're going to be okay. So I'm going to let this run with no load for a couple minutes and just make sure that surge doesn't come back. I think we're okay. It's been a few minutes. The surge is gone. You know, I can't hear it. I actually took a look at the governor arm and it is rock solid steady. It's not moving at all. So I think, you know, it kind of worked itself out. So load bank is nice and cool, so we can shut that down and shut the engine down. This one, it threw us a curveball at the end with the surging. You know, thankfully that was an easy fix. You know, unlike last week's NorthStar video, which threw us a big curveball, and that ended in the total loss of the machine. Thankfully, though, that's not the case here. It had no issues pulling its rated load of 6,600 watts, and the THD was quite low. You know, the highest I saw was 5.6%, which is pretty impressive for a traditional non-inverter generator like this. You know, not many can make that claim, so this one is being added to the short list of machines that can produce clean power. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.